Hello once again to the internet. If you didn't know, here's a fun anecdote. If you didn't know, I'm stroking my blue eye right now, which, if you don't know what that means, could be taken horribly out of context. A blue eye is an IKEA cuddly shark plush thing, and for reasons that are too complicated to explain, they've become known as like trans icons on the internet. And naturally I had to get one. And the silly thing is that she's not even an official blue eye, because she's purple, which is not only the best colour, but not actually an officially available IKEA shark colour. Let this awkward anecdote be the introduction to the video that I'm currently working title is going to be I'm Still Trans, by the way. I think it's because I have a lot going on in the gender way recently. I recently noticed again that my video from like my coming out video from like 7 years ago is still on the channel, and I find it very difficult to listen to for a number of reasons. But I think it's healthy to occasionally look at like old content of mine, because it does remind me how far I've come in a lot of ways, and how long I've been conscious of this and putting up with this. And okay, we've immediately encountered one of the topics I knew I wanted to talk about today, which is, during whatever this is, a self-inflicted therapy session, I don't know. One of the topics I definitely wanted to cover today is, it's very easy, and I'm speaking just for myself here, but I find it very easy to focus perhaps too much on the trans pain rather than the trans joy. And I don't want to suppress bad feelings, it's not healthy to just keep everything pent up inside, but it is too easy, and this is coming from someone who has had her dark moments as well. It is too easy to focus on the negative, because I don't know if you've been paying attention, but the world is fucking garbage in a lot of ways for a lot of people. There is arguably trans genocide or two going on currently in some parts of the world, depending on whose definition of genocide you go with. I personally feel like once you get to the point where it's like debatably genocide, things have already gone too far. So whether or not a genocide is happening should not come down to a legal quabble, even though it probably unfortunately often does. Moving the darkness strictly back, I will have to put a content warning on this video. I've been feeling a lot of trans joy in the last week, for instance, just, most recently. No, I'll build up to that. I'll build up to why I've been having trans joy recently. I'm on a lot of meds at this point in my life. I am on the hormone replacement therapy. I have been for years now, but my dose has been going up and up and up. And a few months ago I started blockers for the first time, which is the real kind of like, even though I've been on estrogen for years, blockers really felt like that was the first non-gradual change that I felt like. And everyone feels these things differently, but for me it was just like, within a month my emotions were noticeably, did I say emotions or emotions? My emotions were noticeably different, it's one of those funny things, because, gender is a social construct. Gender is kind of a weird cultural contract that we all, well, not all of us, but we've kind of generally agreed works a certain way. Of course, a big part of the problem with how society treats gender is that it is often enforced on people rather than kind of being a mutually beneficial, mutually agreed upon contract, and this is why we need socialism. God, what the hell was I talking about? This is a new recording setup for me, by the way, and by that I mean I'm literally talking into my phone's recording app, which you would think is something I thought to have tried by now, but I've been kind of experimenting with different microphone setups for a while, and shockingly, I've never thought to try this one. What was I talking about? Oh, HRT, yeah. Fuck it, this is just going to be a form of therapy session now. I am someone who is very repressed, I think. I've had years of therapy now. I had one particular gender-specific therapist for like 4 years. Saw him most weeks. It was until the pandemic, actually. Also, I've just loudly snorted into the microphone. I apologise. It's one of those things where I kind of didn't think it would be as noisy as it turned out to be, so sorry about that. There's even a handy dandy feature on this thing where you can like pause and then cough and then resume the recording, so there's no excuse for that. Anyway, I'm a very repressed person. I say that I've been like conscious of my transness. I've been conscious of my gender for like, oh god, when was late 2015? Basically 8 years ago, 7 years and change. And I think that's an important distinction because that's when I became conscious of it. And I don't know how long before that it was kind of like something I was subconsciously trying to put my finger on. It did explain a lot of things, like my first novel, which is a complete novel, by the way, was about a lizard man who felt very alienated being adopted into like a human city. He was raised by humans, and I also deliberately wrote him at the time, and this is all pre-coming out, this is all pre-conscious, not just coming out, pre-consciousness of myself. I wrote him like very not traditionally masculine. He was a very anxious person. He's a very a big old sub, a big old bottom, basically. No, I mean, yes, but you know, in all seriousness, I consciously wrote him at the time as not traditionally masculine, but I don't think I realized at the time I was using like inhuman protagonists and not traditionally masculine characters. I was like accidentally scraping away at my own gender identity like a dinosaur fossil. And the strange thing is, if there was any one moment where I became, I genuinely don't think it was this simple, but the earliest thing I remember looking at around that time of 2015 and going, oh shit, this trans stuff seems worryingly relatable. It was probably a long dead website called Cracked, where they had like mostly comedic articles, but I liked Cracked a lot because they actually kind of used their powers for good, and they had several articles, I think, about like top 5 things I learned as a trans woman in Texas or something like that. Top 5 things I learned as an oppressed minority in a hostile environment, sort of things. I remember there was something about sex work on there I read once too, but I read this really interesting article. It was like top 5 things I learned from becoming a woman or something like that. I remember reading that and thinking, just, it's hard not to over-dramatize it now, but I remember reading that and going, oh, that sounds scary, but cool and interesting. There was this kind of envy, even if I wouldn't have called it that at the time, and there was this kind of damn, I had a word other than envy and it's gone. Oh no, there was like a sense of like, I've said to people before that it was like, until I became conscious of it, I always thought gender was kind of something that was happening to other people. Is kind of how I've ended up rationalizing it. It was kind of like, look over there, look. You see that? That's some, look, that's some gender. That must be that gender I've been hearing about. Whoa. That's interesting. Oh well. Back to my life. I am someone who really struggles to talk about myself in the third person. I will struggle to use my name, like to say it out loud, you know. I've been Jazz legally for years and unofficially for years before that. Part of the reason I've renamed my online presence so many times is because I just kind of kept not literally going through names, but kind of going through how I felt about identifying. It's confusing. How I kind of wanted to present on the internet, not just kind of, not in a different gender, but in a different vibe. And the funny thing is, the name Jazz really kind of, I learned like within a year that coincidentally, and this is a genuine coincidence, there's some level of trans celebrity also called Jazz. And that was a genuine coincidence. I don't know where the name came from other than there was a girl I had a crush on at one point called Jazz, but I genuinely never knew her very well. But I think Jasmine is a good name because it's like a traditionally femme name, right? But it also shortens to Jazz, which is like short and sweet and simple and sounds cool. I've also gone back and forth over like whether I want people to call me Jax sometimes, but like this is a very occasional thing. Like I've probably forgotten to even mention it to almost anyone, but that's like just. I guess I really wanted a name that could be shortened to something, or even have a couple of possible nicknames, you know. I do remember one of the first times I was in a shop. And this is real, like, stream of consciousness we're getting into here now. This is welcome to the Jasmine ASMR Brain Train channel. Wall to wall, non-stop, 24/7, unrelated gender thoughts. I do remember quite vividly. I think I remember the Asda this happened in. I remember being in a shop and someone else called to a different person I don't know who must have been called Jasmine, and they just went, Jasmine? And I remember the first time that happened and I had that like reflexive like, huh? Of someone calling your name out, you know? And that was, it's kind of like so funny to look back on now. I very rarely think or see my old name anymore, and I'm very sensitive about it, as a lot of trans people are about their old names. I won't get too dark, but if you don't know, the common term is dead name, for a couple of reasons. Trans people refer to their birth names as dead names, and I think cis people might think that sounds a bit harsh or something. At the risk of getting dark again, one of the reasons for the term dead name is because trans people are quite often buried, you know, when they die, they are quite often involuntarily buried under their former names for like legal reasons or dickhead reasons, basically. So the name dead name refers in part literally to, unfortunately, the name that a lot of people will be unconsensually buried in. So it also kind of could be seen as like, you know, this is a former person, I'm not that person anymore. I don't always use the term dead name because I think it does sound a bit harsh to cis people, basically. But I wouldn't question someone else saying it, so, you know, that's just me. Maybe I'll mention the thing I referenced earlier, which has kind of got me yeah, let's give some kind of context to it, and then we'll get into it. So, not dwelling on the dystopian nightmare that is the gender healthcare system under the public healthcare gender system in the UK, and I'm sure there are places where it's even worse. It's just that the UK one makes headlines for how bad it is, certainly in Europe at least. And I'm lucky enough, in most regards, I am quite a privileged person who gets to live an isolated, secure life in most regards. If it wasn't for the gender stuff, I'd be a very safe and boring person. So I was able to essentially skip the queue for HRT by getting a private referral, which isn't fair. I will admit it's not fair. I don't feel good about it, but I also it's healthcare at the end of the day. I'm not going to suffer in silence. Not a principle, essentially, but so that got me on HRT nice and early, relatively speaking. You literally can't rush these things because it's medicine, and even on private, it's quite easy to get gate kept out of the system, but it's definitely far more distressingly difficult to get help if you can't afford to go private for anything. So I got HRT relatively quickly, and that's all good. And then about a year and a bit ago, I started actively pursuing surgical intervention. Just had to breathe that in. I just had to breathe in the awkwardness of that topic coming up. Yeah, breathe it in. I think humour is a good sort of tension diffusing tactic. I just don't want to rely on it too much, This is a 60-70% serious recording. About a year ago, I started actively pursuing surgery as opposed to sort of just vaguely thinking about it all the time. Not all trans people feel gender dysphoria, or not all trans people agree with the term gender dysphoria or gender incongruence, whatever the new term is. I definitely have mixed feelings about it, but in terms of, getting medical help, it's just easier for me to call my experience gender dysphoria. So, about a year ago, I started actively pursuing gender surgery. I went to London for an unreferred consultation with a surgeon who was very, very nice with her team. And that was just an information gathering trip, because I knew pretty much what she was going to tell me. But just you want to get it from the source, ideally. And you need, for surgery, the particular surgery I'm talking about, you need 2 psych referrals, which seems odd, but whatever. And has to be from 2 different psych people, obviously, not 2 different appointments with the same person. And those are good for a year, and then you have to get them again, which, whatever. And the other thing that I needed was my testosterone to be suppressed to a certain range. And there was a confusion I'll get to about my estrogen levels. I went and booked in those psych appointments, and those happened in November. There was a follow-up thing that happened a bit later. So I got those, and then I started blockers, which got my testosterone levels just in the toilet, which is where I like to say this. They're in the toilet where they belong, is what I like to say. Which has been amazing, honestly. It's been really funny being on blockers. At one point my testosterone, and it's still it's been in the perfect sort of range of where they need it, the T, for 4 months now. At one point my testosterone, when the blood test came back, it was literally 1/10 of what it had been before. Blockers just kill testosterone practically overnight. And it's been a really interesting experience because I think I mentioned the testosterone blockers was kind of like the first. Everything else with HRT has been very gradual. Blockers was like the first thing that I almost just felt it immediately in comparison. And I don't mind saying this, I've been someone who could never cry, right? And I think a lot of that is psychological and kind of societal. If you are quote unquote raised male, society kind of extra discourages you from showing off certain feelings, like anger and pride are like the two acceptable male emotions. I'm exaggerating slightly, but not that kind of pride, by the way, the Catholic kind, the old-fashioned Old Testament kind. But literally, on blockers, my emotions, and I actually think they've settled down a bit now, but for a couple of months, my emotions were all over the place. There was also a lot going on, so it's kind of hard to be objective about it, but it takes comparatively very little to make me cry these days. And actually, sometimes, I still want to cry, and I have to how to put this, I feel more able to cry, and then also, so I think there's a physiological element, but there's also a psychological element where I'm learning to allow myself to feel these emotions as well, but it just doesn't seem like a coincidence, anyway. The news I referenced coming out in the last week is we're all good to go. Surgery is go. This will be my first operation of any kind, so I'm kind of jumping in the deep end, running before I can walk. That sounds too negative, but there was a problem for 6 weeks where I had kind of come to a misunderstanding, and I was justified in this misunderstanding, but I basically got the wrong end of the stick with something about my HRT and what was required for surgery, and for 6 weeks I couldn't get hold of my endocrinologist, and I had to wait, and it was fine, but I had to go and get another consultation in London to talk to the surgeon again and just get it from the source, and I was completely honest with her. I'm like, here's my blood levels, here's my psych reports, what else do you need? And she's like, no, well, that's it. You've got what you need. I'm sorry if there was some miscommunication, but no, that's actually, you have had what you need for 3 months. I'm like, oh, and it's not that simple. I'm sure it's good to know that for 4 months my testosterone has been consistently in the range that they need and everything. I had talked myself for 6 weeks into thinking, quite often in life I like to operate under the philosophy of, if you expect the worst, you can only be pleasantly surprised. Now, that doesn't always work out as a good idea for me, but I'd recently got my hopes up about the blood levels, and then when a blood test came back with concerning, what I thought were concerning levels, I kind of went into a spiral slightly because I hadn't expected a problem. I'd really kind of got a bit overexcited possibly and just thought everything was going fine. Ironically, everything was going fine, and I just misconstrued this situation. But so I went to London last week, kind of not feeling good, after 6 weeks of, I've been so stressed that I told my doctor that I was feeling chest symptoms and everything, and stomach symptoms. I was like, I'm sure it's just stress, but I had to mention to the GP that I was feeling these symptoms, so she actually got me to get an ECG, which turned out to be fine, but it was unfamiliar, so I was scared of it. And then the chap gives me the ECG and he's like, well, your heart is totally fine as far as I can tell. And I was like, that's good. It's good to know that I'm just stressed out of my mind and it's not a heart condition. At least that's what it looks like. So I was in a real kind of... I've been in darker places, but for those like 6-7 weeks when I thought surgery was going to be substantially delayed by like 6 months to a year, basically. And after kind of putting my life on hold for the entirety of this year so far, which has only been 3 months, I know, but I've got all this like stuff going on with housing and everything that I want to look into. I've got other life things that I could be doing, but with surgery being imminent, it's not actually advisable to do other stuff, including some psychological stuff. I won't go into this because for several reasons, but one of the psychs said that along with gender dysphoria, some of my symptoms sound like I might have, and this was just, he was very tentative about this because he was like, I'm not diagnosing you, you would have to like investigate this to get a diagnosis properly. But he said I might have something like complex PTSD. And that was very interesting. And, again, I'm clarifying this is not a diagnosis. This is just, a theory that he had based on a 10-minute segment of a 1-hour conversation. But I bring it up because he actually also said he doesn't recommend investigating that fully and unpacking that fully as a possible condition that I've got. Whatever the condition is, that's causing those symptoms. Not gender dysphoria, which I definitely have, but the trauma-esque symptoms that I also seem to have. He recommended against unpacking those immediately before also having an operation, a very emotional major surgery, because unpacking trauma, he said, can be a wild ride and would take all of my mental energy basically. And I'm like, so I'm glad he told me that. I'm glad it's good to know. But I also kind of now I'm like, oh, so I've got this thing possibly, but I also can't like look into it properly and unpack it right before an operation. So it's I've kind of been left in a funny position in that way. But but I went to, sorry, I'm telling this in the most rambly way possible. I went to London, had the appointment. It was like perfect as far as unpleasant medical appointments go. It was perfect. And the emotional whiplash, I genuinely thought I was going to like lose control of my emotions and happy cry just there in the office, but I didn't. I ended up waiting until I was on the train, and then I lost control of my emotions a little bit and had a little bit of a happy cry. And I phoned my mum while I was at the train station beforehand as well. It was just like, it's completely emotionally overwhelming. I'm conscious, and I did mention every trans person has a different like experience and opinion for themselves when it comes to medical intervention. Some trans people or non-binary people or just non-gender conforming umbrella term people don't feel the need to get any sort of medical intervention. A whole lot of other people cannot access it. There's a huge portion of people who would like to get medical help but cannot. It's out of their control. So again, I do definitely count myself lucky in that regard. The surgery is... They're apparently going to get back to me tomorrow and offer me some dates. And to be clear, that is dates for the operation. And there's obviously a lot of detail that I know that I don't want to go into. But the gist of it is, it will be something hopefully in June. because that's what they previously suggested it could be about a month ago. But even if it was July, August, that's no time at all away, is it? So they said to me, basically they booked the appointment in, there's some paperwork and stuff obviously, a month before, and my voice is going, hang on, a month before the surgery date, I will come off my estrogen, take in patch form by the way, and I was interested that you specifically don't have to come off the blockers, where you come off the estrogen. And this is for they called it a theoretical blood clot risk. And they're even happy, it's not a complete, like, deal breaker. If you're happy, if I was willing, I should use first person. This is something my old therapist told me, I should try and use first person more. If I wanted to, I could sign a waiver that says I accept any theoretical consequences of me not stopping my meds before surgery, and I could just avoid doing that. But I don't feel that strongly about it, considering everything else I'm worried about with surgery. Coming off estrogen for a month sucks, but it's only a month. It's not like, I think it'll just kind of exacerbate my emotional chaos of, like, and it'll also, like, act as a very, like, it'll be in my calendar, stop HRT, and that'll act as a very clear, like, countdown beginning, like, 4 weeks, here it comes, So it won't help my emotional situation, but, and then the silly thing is, I think even before I leave hospital, they'll tell me I can just start using my patches again. So it really is just a very temporary thing. It's very soon after surgery if it isn't still in hospital. And then 2 weeks before the op, there's like a pre-assessment where they just do an exam and some blood tests and stuff. And in and of itself, that's not too bad. But again, it's just like, here it comes, and it's very, I think what I was trying to say a minute ago when I did that little tangent about, some trans people feel like this, some people feel like that, some people can't access it, and I'm gonna, again, I think of my old therapist a lot with this stuff, because he came to know me very well, at least in the context of therapy. Professional relationship, but I'll admit to this too, but he said that I kind of like have a way of, he would, without pushing too hard, he would try and pull words out of me that I was clearly like uncomfortable saying, which sounds weird. Let me say it. I would clearly be trying to express a feeling, but in a very sort of subtextual way where I would kind of not use the words. I know that I'm a woman. I know that I was very depressed for a long time. And I know that being able to express my gender and have friendships as a woman and have intimate relationships as a woman has been so much just more real, and I'm really like worried that this sounds like some sort of mumbo jumbo. I can feel the silence. I can feel my brain struggling to spin. I know that the meds have done me a lot of good, and I know when I think about, like, well, I can't imagine going back, I can't imagine. I think my pre-transition time was kind of such a... I was so suppressed in myself and so unable to feel things in a sort of authentic way. And I'm still a very anxious, very possibly on a neurodivergent spectrum person. I'm very particular about germs, I'm very particular about routines of like how I do things on a daily basis. I have other stuff going on. My life isn't just gender, but it's obviously like a huge... And one of the ironies of being trans and being queer in general, to be honest, is ironically it wouldn't be such a big part of people's identity if society didn't treat queer people so poorly, historically and in most of the world. You know, well, everywhere in some regard, you know, depending on what regard you mean, queer people are mistreated systematically all over the world, just the same with racialized people and everything. I'm not in a societal oppression sort of discussion mode right now, but I guess this goes back to, again, what I was talking about with I don't want to ignore the sadness and the dark feelings I have sometimes, because that's not healthy, but I also don't want to dwell on them too much, because, you know, then it becomes harder to appreciate the goodness, of which there is a lot. And you know, I just I've actually, you know, been relatively lucky. I have had I have been hate crimed a couple of times, but it is probably literally a single digit number of times. It's also kind of murky because some of it is probably just misogyny, to be honest. I've been catcalled definitely a few times. When I was out and about for a Halloween party last year, I was barked at. Literally barked at by a guy driving past in a car, which on the one hand it was kind of over in a second, and he was also like physically escaping from me at the time, so there wasn't really any fear that it was going to escalate, which is always, like, you know, the worst part of any sort of verbal assault, is you don't know if that's all it's going to be, you know, which, you know, it's being verbally abused is bad enough in itself, but if they're then still stood in front of you, verbally abusing you, you don't know if it might escalate to physical violence too. So, I keep making it darker than I mean it to, you know. Going back to surgery, it's the scariest thing I've ever done. I've already done so many things in the last several years, but especially last year. And oh look, there goes my voice again. Hang on. Yeah, I've done I've done things the last several years, and especially in the last year or two, that I was completely terrified about. You know, when I was first in the waiting room for the first surgery consultation last year, I was like, I genuinely think I was halfway to having a panic attack by the time they called my name out. I was just so anxious, so dysphoric in anticipation of the exam and the intimate questions, you know. So, you know, to be a very private, very shy, very anxious, very isolated person, and to willingly sign up for major surgery, which is also major expensive, I gotta say. You know, I'm feeling that private healthcare expense, which I'm fortunate to be able to afford, and you know, I do have backup. Even if I wasn't able to afford it, I would have backup. But I'm really feeling the I'm so happy, you know, I am genuinely so happy that there isn't this. I was really the thing I keep saying is, surgery is like a real huge, scary, short-term investment of pain and discomfort and, quite frankly, mess and misery. It's a short-term investment. It's a short-term pain to prevent, long-term pain. I keep calling it like death by 1,000 cuts is kind of the alternative. I'm in my early 30s. I've come to terms with that. It doesn't really mean anything. But I would like to get this done before I turn 40, certainly. There are times when I definitely feel the great, yawning chasm of lost time, lost childhood, lost adolescence, and it doesn't help that my life, I kind of have almost an entirely different friend group and stuff since then. But, that's just life. People move on, But I don't like to, I genuinely, again, it's fine to think about the past, it's fine to think about what could have been and do something with those feelings, but I don't want to dwell on it, because then I get more depressed, and then when I'm more depressed, I stop making any progress. If I give up, and by give up I don't mean, the ultimate giving, hang on, by give up I don't mean a judgmental way of saying the ultimate bad thing happening. I mean, just being depressed and not doing anything that I want to do. That's how I definitely won't make progress, is if I don't try. I just, it's a huge deal. It's an unbelievably huge deal. It's one of the biggest things of my life, probably. If I get hit by a car and have to decide whether or not to have spinal surgery at some point in the future, that will probably be the other biggest medical decision of my life. But for the time being, this is definitely one of them. And, I don't... Being trans is not exclusively a medical topic. It's unfortunate that just the reality of our society kind of makes it be talked about as an exclusively medical topic, and that's when they're not trying to paint queer people as predators or undesirables in some other way, just, do you know what most, well, hang on, I'll speak purely for myself. Do you know what I think about on a daily basis? What would I be doing if I could press the magic surgery button and just have the perfect body that I want? What would I be doing right now? I'd probably be eating Monster Munch and watching, RoboCop for the 50th time. I would not be doing anything remotely threatening or controversial. I would be building my fucking Satisfactory factory. It's funny again, I'm going to be, it's something like, it's 10 to 12 weeks is the official recommended surgeon sick leave sign off that they'll give you. I'm very blessed again that my work actually gives me, I'm entitled at my job to up to 6 months of full-time, full-pay sick leave, which I'm very, very, very appreciative of, obviously. And then there's a staggered return after that, phased return. I genuinely don't think I'll need 6 months. I wouldn't be surprised if I need 4 or 5 months. And considering, I will literally be, one of the things I'm most scared of, and again, I'll keep this vague, one of the things I'm most scared of with surgery is I know the aftercare is intense. I feel very well informed, I feel very well researched. And that doesn't mean unexpected things can't happen, it doesn't mean my situation will be exactly like someone else's, obviously. Could be a lot better, could be a lot worse, but I am relatively young and healthy still. I genuinely am young and genuinely relatively healthy, I know someone who had it done twice my age, at least. As far as I'm aware, she's still kicking about, so... I will be, just the aftercare is intense, and I really worry about, fucking it up. Basically, I'd have to really neglect myself to seriously do damage, but I worry about being, post-surgery depression is a very real thing. In general, but possibly even more so than usual with this kind of operation. It's just because it's so intensive, and your body has physically gone through so much, and then there's the whole meds situation, coming off your meds and going back on your meds, and then there's the literally months of aftercare, and I won't say what the aftercare is, but for 2 months I have to do the aftercare 3 times a day, and then after that you have like a post-surgery consultation where you go back to London and they see you for 20 minutes and say, yep, you're good to go, goodbye forever. In the unlikely event they find a problem, they'll do something else, but all being well, I'll never see them again after that. It's like, goodbye, thank you. But then, like, I think for a month after that, I do the aftercare twice a day, and then it goes down to once a day, and then like a couple times a week. But eventually, the aftercare is once a month for the rest of my life, and at that point, that's nothing, right? Compared to brushing your teeth, that's no amount of time and effort. If you brush your teeth twice a day, every day, hopefully, that's considerably more effort than even fairly intensive aftercare for once a month, every month. But I'm running out of steam slightly, and I didn't have much of a direction going into this little recording, but I'm glad I did it. Got my purple shark, feeling good, feeling better. I may cheekily stay up a bit later than usual, despite having work in the morning, because I would like to continue working on my factory. I'm working on a second novel, by the way. I'm like 25,000 words into a lesbian romance vampire sci-fi novel, which also has Esperanto and communism in it. It's funny how I forget how weird my book is sometimes. The current working title is Blood of the Workers, because it's about vampires and socialism. I should point out that technically it's not socialism, because it's about a sort of enclave district of a wider post-apocalyptic city on this ice planet, and the vampires have been kind of forced to rely upon each other, and they have a much more sort of they have a relative unusual level of autonomy within the vampire district where most of the vampires are, but they are still legally under the wider city government, which is like this very sort of neoliberal hellscape government. So it's not technically socialism, because they are still officially under a neoliberal government, and that's kind of the whole political tension of the plot. Is the vampires want to be free of that city government, and the debate is how to go about that without without the revolution falling apart around them, basically. So I've got a lot of stuff going on in my mind, can you tell? Yeah, but writing is a very good, as well as recording impulsive YouTube videos, writing can be a very good way of kind of getting my queer rage out of my brain. Whatever this was, I think I'm glad I did it. I think I'm gonna go play with my factory now. Not a euphemism. It's funny how this video will almost be immediately aged, because if they come back to me tomorrow and give me a surgery date, then it's instantly, this video is out of date, but what can you do? It's also going to be very, very weird if I listen back to stuff like this months after surgery. Oh, I'm having that kind of like, just only a little bit, but I'm having that kind of will I, won't I cry thing around the eyes, which is actually quite nice. It reassures me that I'm alive and feeling feelings, Being trans is not about being sad, it's ultimately about trying to escape being sad and be happy with yourself. There's so much of a kind of societal and cultural, like this whole cliche of the sad queer in media, bury your gays and all these tropes. I think trans people in particular recently are often portrayed as like, oh, the trans burden that the burden of gender that one must bear. And that might be the experience sometimes. But it's about getting away from that, right? It's about, and I'm going to do the first person thing again, it's about being comfortable in my skin and feeling like a real person. And I caught my recent therapist off guard slightly when I said to her, like, I was really trying to describe to a cis person what my, again, personal gender dysphoria feelings can be like sometimes when they're bad. And I said, it's like, when dysphoria is bad, it's like my soul is, trapped in the wrong body, and I'm not a real person. I'm like a freakish meat puppet approximation of a person. That's what it feels like when it's bad. And that's just my experience. People are very, very different personal outlooks, but that's when it's bad. And when it's good, when that sweet, sweet gender euphoria hits, baby, that's what it's all about. In the unlikely event this recording has cracked someone's egg and you've just realised that you might be trans, grats, have a good time with that. It might not feel like a good thing right now, but you'll figure it out. You'll get there. You are valid, bitches. You can't. You are all valid, bitches. Would be a good sort of like recurring joke ending to have. I think people come up with recurring joke endings because it's actually very difficult to come up with impulsive good endings for content. Is that what I am now? Am I a content influencer? Am I a TikToker on the internet? I feel like my life is one big TikTok countdown recently. Countdown to joy, baby. Countdown to not safe for work words, baby. Countdown to feeling more like a person again, even feeling more like me. Being able to say that with a straight face. Jasmine, she, her, over and out. Bitches.